हेलो फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लासेस में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको जॉफ्री चौसर का प्लान एंड पर्पस ऑफ द प्रोलॉग हेडिंग है द ओरिजिन ऑफ प्लान। इट इज़ डिफ़िकल्ट टू ट्रेस आउट द ओरिजिन ऑफ द प्लान ऑफ द कंटरबरी टेल्स and the prologue. The plan of the tales was probably adopted soon after 1386, the year in which Chaucer composed the prologue to the Legend of Good Women. The composition of the prologue to the tales is commonly believed to have been completed in 1387. It has been assumed that Chaucer himself took part in a pilgrim in April of that year, perhaps because of the illness of his wife Philippa, who probably died a few months later. The calendar of the year would provide very well for the dates mentioned in the tales. The unfinished state of the Canterbury Tales would suggest that Chaucer was occupied with the tales till the very end of his life. Heading the idea of the pilgrimage. The Canterbury Tales have been woven in the framework of a pilgrimage. There has been much speculation as it to what suggested to Chaucer the idea of a pilgrimage. He may of course have been describing an actual experiences or moral than one. There is no reason to believe that he restored to any book for knowledge of the pilgrimage as an institution in the general devices of a framework story or a series of tales within an enclosing narrative. It is believed that he imitated Decameron of Boccaccio. However, the idea of the tales within a tale was so popular and familiar that no particular model need to be sought. The Persian tales entitled The Thousands and One Nights were so popular. Ovid's Metamorphosis, Gower's Confessio Amanthis, and Chaucer's own Legends of Good Women were also already there, but Chaucer's Canterbury Tales have a device which was never used by any author before. The devices of the pilgrimage is one of the happiest ever employed in a collection of stories. It afforded Chaucer an opportunity to bring together a representative group of various classes of society united by the common religious purpose. Heading the pilgrimage. The prologue graphically describes all the 32 pilgrims, including the innkeeper and Chaucer himself. The prologue suggests that Chaucer reached one spring evening the Tabard Inn in Southwark, a suburb at the southern end of London Bridge. This was the place of departure and arrival of the pilgrims, setting out on the pilgrimage to the shrine of Becket at Canterbury. As Chaucer alighted at the inn, he found a group of 29 pilgrims ready to set out on the pilgrimage to Canterbury. Chaucer himself and the innkeeper, the host, also joined the company. At supper, the host of the Tabard Inn purposes that on their journey on horses, each of them would tell 2 tales from this side and 2 more on their return journey, and thus relieve themselves of the tediousness of the journey. All the pilgrimage, it was agreed, would submit to the judgment of the host as to which of them tells the best story, and the best storyteller among them was to be given a supper at the general expense. This decision having been accepted by all, they agreed to set out on their journey early next morning. Lost are drawn to decide who shall tell the first tell the lot falls to the knight, but the company of the pilgrims never reaches Canterbury, and only 23 of the pilgrims get their turn to tell their tales. Some tales are left incomplete, others are manifestly unadapted to the tellers. However, the tales present before us a cross-section of contemporary social life. The purpose in writing the prologue was Chaucer's desire to represent 14th century social life realistically and graphically. Each pilgrim is representative of his class. Thus, all the broad social classes bearing the lowest and the highest are colorfully gathered together in the prologue. Chaucer was the first poet to create living human characters in English literature. His characters are as real today as they were in Chaucer's day. The Company of the Pilgrims heading है The prologue to the Canterbury Tales presents before us a complete picture of 14th century social life. Each pilgrim is so graphically sketched out that he stands out before us both as an individual as well as the representative of his class. There are in all 29 pilgrims. The poet and the host also join the company, and therefore the number comes to 32. There is a knight lately come from foreign war. He has fought in Prussia and Turkey. He is a high-minded, gentle-mannered, heroic adventurer. He is courteous and chivalrous. With him is his son, a young squire, curly-haired and gay as fresh as the month of May. He is embroidered like a mad with red and white flowers. The servant is a yeoman in coat and hood of green with a shield of peacock arrows under his belt. There is a whole group of ecclesiastical figures representing the different interests and classes of the medieval church. Most of them are historical portraits, exposing in their worldliness and materialism the abuses which had crept into the church and which Wycliffe denounced. First of all, there is a monk who cares only for hunting and good cheer. His bald head shines like glass, his bright eyes roll in his head. He rides a sleek brown palfrey and has many a dainty horse. In his stable his sleeves are trimmed with fur at the wrist. His hood is fastened under his chin with a gold love knot. Another figure joining the party is Madame Eglantine, the prioress. She is a teacher of young ladies speaking French after the school of Stratford at Bourne. She is exquisite in her table manners, affecting as well as she can the stately behavior of the court. Other ecclesiastics are hanger on and caterpillar of the church. The friar, intimate maid, hospitable franklin, innkeepers and worthy women, and despising beggars and lagers. The summoner's repulsive person with fire red cherubim face, the pardoner with his bag full of pardons, come from Rome all hot, and bit of cloth and pig's bones, which he sells as relics of holy saint. Chaucer treats the evil churchman with good-humoured tolerance. He produces a better effect by setting beside them as a type of the true shepherd of the church, a poor person such as partly under the influence of Wycliffe was coming forward to inform the church. Chaucer paints the character of the person poor in the world, goods but rich of holy thoughts and work. With a loving and reverent touch, the person's brother travel with him, a plowman, a true swinker, and a good who helps his poor neighbors without hire and loves them as himself. He reminds us of peers of the plowman, a crowd of other figures in there to fill the canvas. There is a shipman from the west country, a representative of those adventurous seamen, half merchants, sailors, half smugglers and pirates, who had already made England's name of a terror on the high seas and paved the way for her future navals and commercial supremacy. There is a poor clerk of Oxford riding a horse as lean as a rack and dresses in threadbare cloth, who spends all that he can beg or borrow upon his studies. He represents that passion for learning which was stirring everywhere in Europe and which was to culminate in Renaissance. There is a merchant in a Flemish weaver hat on a high horse, concealing as he can with his air of self-importance the fact that he is in debt. There is a group of guide members in the library of their guide, all worthy to be aldermen. They, along with the merchant, represents the mercantile and manufacturing class. They point to the future rise of England as a great commercial power. There is the wife of Bath, almost a modern feminist figure, hit off with masterly humor and realism. A permanent human type, she has had husband 5 at church door, and though Samuel Deaf hopes to live to bed several others, she rides on an ambler with spur and scarlet hedge on her feet, and on her head a hat as broad as a buckler. In fact, they represent the entire range of English society of the 14th century, leaving out the highest aristocracy and the lowest order of villains and serfs. Heading a summary of the prologue. Chaucer tells us that in month of April, when the spring showers bring freshness and life to all the plants, fruits and flowers, and all the birds sing merrily, people plan to go on pilgrimage. Particularly, they set out of Canterbury to seek the blessing of the holy martyr Saint Thomas a Becket. On the day in this month, it happened that the poet was staying at the Tabard Inn in Southwark on his pilgrimage to Canterbury. At night, a group of 29 pilgrims happened to arrive at that inn. The host, Harry Bailey, entertained them all and accommodated them in his spacious inn. Chaucer made friends with them, but before telling anything more about these pilgrims, Chaucer described the characters, habits, dresses, etc. of all these pilgrims. He describes his characters one by one. The knight, heading a knight, the knight, a very perfect, gentle knight, was a worthy fellow who loved truth, honor, freedom, and courtesy. He had fought in battles on behalf of his lord more often than any other man in Christian as well as in heathen countries. Often at feast he sat at the head of the table above men of all nations. In Prussia he had been in 15 deadly battles for the sake of Christian faith and always earned great renown and praise. but he was as modest in his bearing as a maiden. So far his dress is concerned, he wear a coat of coarse cloth all covered with dust, for he had just returned from his adventures. Heading the squire. The young squire is lover and merry bachelor with curly locks, was the son of the knight. He was also a brave soldier who had fought in several battles, hoping to win his lady's favor. He wore an embroidered garment. He was always singing and fluting. In his disposition, he was as fresh as he is the month of May. He could sit gracefully on the horse and ride well. He could compose songs, recite them, and also fight in the tournament and dance, paint, and write well. He was such a passionate lover that he could not sleep at night, but before his father he was quite meek and serviceable. The heading a human. The knight had a human and no servant. The human, who wore a coat and a green hood, carried carefully under his belt a shield of peacock arrows, and he carried his gear quite skillfully, but his head was close-cropped and his face brown. He was well versed in woodcraft. He wore a bright arm guard upon his arm, and on his breast a figure of St. Christopher. He also carried a hunting horn hung by a green baldric belt. He was a true forester, as Chaucer guessed. Heading the prioress. There was also a prioress or a nun, who was simple and quiet in smiling. She was known as Madame Eglantine. Had her greatest oath was by St. Lo. She sang God's Prayer in a charming nasal tone. Besides this, she spoke French in the manner of the school of Stratford at Bonn, for the French of Paris was not known to her. In table manners she was well versed. She ate very neatly and cautiously. Not a drop fell on her breast. She wiped her upper lips so clean that not a trace of grease was to be seen on the edge of her cup. Certainly she took pains to imitate a courtly kind of grace, a stately bearing befitting her place, and to appear dignified in all her dealings. As for her sentimental nature, she was so charitable and compassionate that she would weep if she saw even a mouse caught in a trap. She had some little dogs and wept bitterly if one of them were dead, or if somebody hit one of them with a stick. She wore an elegant cloak, a coral trinket on her arm, a set of bats upon which hung a brooch of shining gold, on which was engraved a crowned a, and then the Latin phrase amor vincit omnia, love conquers all. She had another nun and 3 priests also with her. Heading the monk. There was monk, a fashionable man who had several choice horses in his stable. He tended ignore the old and strict rule of St. More or St. Benedict. He did not care at all for the text which preached that the hunters were not pious persons. He did not attach any importance to such teachings. Why should he study and trouble his mind, always poring over a book in the cloister, or toil his hands as St. Augustine preached? His pleasure lay in hunting and seeking pleasure. He wore a garment lined with finest fur, and his hood was fastened with an ornamental golden pin. He was a fat lord, his eyes sparkling, his boots made of soft leather, and horse in a very good condition. Certainly he was a fair prelate, for he was not pale like a ghost. Adding the friar. There was also a wanton and merry friar. He was one of the greatest flatterers. He had performed the marriage of many young women at his own cost. He was well acquainted with rich landlords throughout his parish. He also knew the esteemed women of the parish, for he had more authority to hear confession than a person. As he had a papal license, he heard confession in a very pleasant manner, and his absolution was sweet. He was the view of that gift to a poor order of friars was sufficient proof of repentance in a sinner. If a man gave money, he knew that he was repentant. Weeping and praying was of no avail. His bag was full of pins and knives, which he gave to beautiful women. He sang in a sweet voice, could play upon the fiddle excellently. His neck was as white as a lily, but he was as strong as a wrestler. He believed that it was not proper for a man of his status and profession to have acquaintance with sick lepers. So he dealt only with the wealthy and rich seller of the victual. He dressed himself not as a poor friar, but like a master or a pope. His habits was to lisp a little so that his English might sound sweet, and when he recited a song, his eyes twinkled in his head. This friar was known as Hubert, adding the merchant. The merchant had a forked head, and he sat on a high horse. He always talked of his own profit. He wished that the sea route between Middelburg and Orwell must be kept upon open. He was well versed in business transaction at the exchange. He employed his intelligence to the best advantage. Nobody ever knew that he was in debt. He was an intelligent merchant. Heading the clerk of Oxford. There was also a clerk of Oxford who had devoted himself long to the study of logic. He was not a worldly man. His garments were worn out, for he paid more attention to books and learning than to rich clothes. All that he got from his friends, he spent it on books. He earnestly prayed for the soul of those who gave him the means by which he could carry on his study. He spoke only as much as was needed. His words were full of meaning and wisdom. He would gladly learn and gladly teach. Heading the sergeants of law. A prudent and wise sergeant of law was also there. He had been a judge by letter of patent at the sessions of the law courts. With his learning and fame, he had earned much money and rich crops. He was so efficient in his job that nobody could find any fault in the legal documents prepared by him. He was quite busy, yet he appeared more busy than he actually was. He knew every statue by heart. Heading है the Franklin. If Franklin was also there in this company, his beard was as white as a daisy and his complexion sanguine. He loved the life of pleasure, for he was the very son of Epicurus. In his hospitality, he was like St. Julian in his country. His beer and wine were always of the best quality. His house was always rich in dainties. He changed his food and supper according to the change of season. He had his new mew full of partridge and pond full of fish. His table fixed in his hall stood ready covered all the day. At the sitting of the law court he was lord and master. He had also served as a sheriff and an auditor. Thanks, best of luck.